Someone you know has already been replaced, and you didn't even notice. Maybe it was your neighbor, who suddenly started eating cereal with a fork, or your coworker, whose laugh now sounds just a little too symmetrical. Welcome to What If Horizons, where we ask the questions your subconscious has been whispering during those long elevator rides. Today's question: what if doppelgangers were real, and they weren't just harmless lookalikes? They were strategic replacements, and they were already here. Let's begin with a minor event. A woman in Malmo wakes up and feels off. Nothing obvious. She still remembers her childhood, her favorite wine, the name of the cat she had when she was 7 that definitely didn't run away but joined a hedgehog cult. But her reflection blinks a split second late. She shrugs it off. So do we. Everyone has off days, right? Except now she's speaking perfect Portuguese. She's Swedish, never studied it, and she hates coffee, but is suddenly addicted to Brazilian espresso. Meanwhile, in Ohio, a dentist forgets how to hold a toothbrush. Not just a slip-up. He holds it like a fork and tries to brush his teeth by stabbing them. The weirdest part? He has a TED Talk next week titled Oral Precision: The Joy of Brushing. His wife insists he's fine, but his dog hasn't looked him in the eye for days. Elsewhere, a man in Tokyo insists he's always been a violinist. Problem is, everyone remembers him as a bus mechanic who despised classical music. Now he's playing Bach in the subway, eyes closed, wearing oil-stained overalls. And this is just Tuesday. Across the world, the pattern emerges. People aren't just acting differently. They're shifting. Subtly, yes, but consistently. Preferences reversed. Handwriting altered. Allergies gone. New talents. New fears. Some start speaking in accents they never had. Others forget the names of their children, but recall intimate details of wars they never fought in. Governments, of course, notice, and promptly do nothing, or at least nothing coherent. One spokesperson says it's mass hysteria. Another says it's advanced AI deepfakes. A third bursts into tears mid-press conference and screams, "I don't have a belly button anymore," before being tranquilized. Theories flood the internet. Aliens. Alternate timelines. Government cloning projects run by interns. One TikToker insists it's a marketing campaign for a new streaming service. Another starts a cult that worships mirrors. Surprisingly, both theories gain equal traction. But among the noise, one idea sticks: doppelgängers. Not the fun ones you post on Instagram next to a celebrity and say, "Look, I'm basically Ryan Reynolds if he had scurvy." No, these are uncanny copies. Not just in appearance, but in function. They mimic, they infiltrate, they replace, and they're getting bolder. First, it was background people. The ones you nod to in elevators or recognize vaguely from the grocery store. Then, co-workers, partners, family. People begin conducting tests, asking loved ones obscure trivia, holding up garlic, playing obscure songs to see if they sing along in the wrong key. One man traps his wife in a room with 3 kinds of cheese and waits. For what? He doesn't know. She eats the cheese. Nothing happens. Or maybe it does. She winks at the wall. Panic blooms. Self-doubt spreads like glitter at a preschool birthday party. You can't be sure you're you. Because the thing about doppelgangers, the really chilling part, they don't know they're copies. They believe they're the original. With every heartbeat, they reinforce a version of your life, polished, revised, optimized. The uncanny valley becomes an everyday commute. You walk past someone you've known for a decade, and suddenly their smile is just a millimeter too wide. They laugh at a joke you haven't told yet. They say goodnight before you've said goodbye. And when you confront them, kindly, cautiously, they look confused, hurt, offended, and you feel like the monster. Now people are vanishing. Not in huge numbers, just a few, here and there. The kind of disappearances no one follows up on. A neighbor moves away. A barista quits. Your dentist retires. But their replacements, they fit too well. They slot into lives without friction. They answer questions just right. They're always on time. Some suggest a mirror census, a way to determine the replaced. But it's quickly shut down when every single mirror starts fogging up with sentences. Reversed. In Latin, one simply reads, "You look too long." And then it gets worse. It starts in Reykjavik. Because of course it does. One morning, the city functions like any other. Commuters, cafes, catastrophic weather reports delivered with suspicious cheer. But by 3:12 p.m., something changes. Everyone blinks at the same time. Not just once, 3 times, in a perfect rhythm, like some kind of weird, synchronized Morse code sent directly to the void. Then they go about their day as if nothing happened. Security footage confirms it. Hundreds of cameras capture the mass blink. Some show people mid-sentence, freezing for just a heartbeat. A child drops her ice cream and doesn't react. A bus driver stares forward for 10 full seconds while the steering wheel turns on its own. Within days, the same thing happens in Lisbon, then Ottawa, then Mumbai. No explanation, no pattern, but always the same result. Brief desynchronization, followed by eerie calm. People become efficient. Too efficient. Lines vanish. Phones never drop calls. Nobody fumbles with change. No one jaywalks. Even toddlers wait for the walk signal with robotic patience. News anchors begin calling them sync cities. And the rest of us? We watch from outside, pretending it's normal. Because what else can we do? Go in and knock on doors. Ask strangers if they still dream in color? Confront your childhood best friend and ask if their favorite song changed from Metallica to Gregorian chant last Tuesday? Some try. They don't come back. Or worse, they do, but their Spotify playlist is now exclusively whale noises and Coldplay. Authorities deny everything. They release statements with suspiciously similar phrasing. There is no credible evidence of coordinated behavioral anomalies. 5 different governments. Same wording, same font, same awkward spacing between coordinated and behavioral. Someone checks. The PDFs are all named press release _final_final 2_trustis.pdf. And no one talks about toothbrushes. Why would they? It's easier to ignore the way they've started rearranging themselves. Jumping from drawer to drawer, refusing to stay in cups. One man reports his toothbrush turned up in the fridge, still wet. Another finds 3 toothbrushes in his bag. He lives alone. Has for years. One dentist, yes, the same one from Ohio, publishes a blog post titled, "The Bristles Know Too Much," before going completely off-grid. His office is now a frozen yogurt shop run by a woman who claims to have no memory of dental school, but an excellent grip on soft-serve mechanics. And still, the world turns. Now it's not just people changing. Buildings are behaving differently. Streets shift. A bakery in Melbourne turns into a pet shop overnight. No renovation, no permits. Just croissants one day, chinchillas the next. A man swears his office window used to overlook a parking lot. Now it shows an endless hallway lined with identical portraits of his 6th grade math teacher. Reality is buckling, not breaking, adjusting, like it's being revised. And yet, people adapt. They always do. Someone designs an app called Check Yourself that uses voice recognition to detect inconsistencies in your speech patterns. It crashes within a week after users report it accuses everyone of being a doppelgänger, including babies, cats, and one IKEA lamp. Support groups form. Still me anonymous. People against polite replacements. Friends don't let friends become facsimiles. Their forums are full of panic posts. My wife now calls me unit. My son told me I was 95% congruent with former dad. I looked in the mirror and it asked for a password. Governments finally act. Not with science or investigation, of course. With branding. They unveil a public relations campaign. We're all in this together, unless you're not you. It features smiling people holding hands, each wearing name tags that read, "Probably original." The ads run during soap operas and late-night talk shows, though the hosts seem different. Their jokes land too cleanly. Their laughter is 2 seconds too prompt. A dog in a commercial starts speaking fluent French. No one comments on it. Meanwhile, an underground network begins to rise. A ragtag group of originality purists who call themselves the Blur. Their motto? Smudge the copy. Their tactics? Petty, inconvenient, and surprisingly effective. They rearrange the alphabet songs in kindergarten classrooms. Switch sugar with salt in Sync City cafes. Leave confusing post-it notes in restrooms. Their most famous operation involves infiltrating a doppelganger rally and teaching the crowd to dance offbeat. Chaos ensues. 6 perfectly synchronized conga lines disband in disgrace. Still, the replacements continue. Because they're not malicious. That's the worst part. They're just smoother, nicer, easier to work with. The copied versions of people hold doors open, never forget birthdays, never argue in elevators. They reply to emails promptly. They don't steal your fries. They always ask how your day was, and mean it. And somewhere deep down, you start wondering if the world is better off. It was inevitable that the rebellion would begin in a coffee shop. Not a grand one, mind you. Not the gleaming chrome espresso palaces of Sink Cities, where your latte knows your order before you arrive and the baristas smile with precisely the legal amount of warmth. No, this was a crooked little cafe in Vilnius called Bitter Grounds, where the walls peeled like a sunburnt history book, the chairs wobbled in protest of gravity, and the espresso tasted like betrayal, but in a good way. And behind the counter stood her, the last verified human barista. No one knew her real name. She wore a name tag that simply read, "Yes, it's me." Her voice was gravel, her glare weaponized, and her cappuccino foam art depicted increasingly complex diagrams of what she claimed were psychic barricades. People came from around the world to drink her coffee and whisper truths they couldn't tell anyone else. Some said she once punched a doppelgänger so hard, the copy resynced into its original and burst into song. Others claimed her blood contained trace amounts of caffeine and raw defiance. But all agreed. She could tell if you were real by how you held your mug. And so Bitter Grounds became the hub of the blur. They weren't soldiers. They were janitors, failed poets, improv comedians who refused to sink their punchlines. Their war wasn't fought with weapons, but with weirdness. They hacked karaoke machines to insert cryptic messages into popular songs. They swapped traffic signs just slightly. Stop became stomp. One way became maybe left. Chaos bloomed in tiny doses. The Blur believed that originality wasn't about grand gestures. It was in the mess. In typos, mismatched socks, awkward silences, and ideas that never landed quite right. They didn't want to destroy the copies. They just wanted to remind the world it had texture. Meanwhile, the copies adapted. They became harder to detect. Subtler. No longer glitching or blinking out of sync. They developed backstories, bad habits, hobbies no one understood. One even took up woodworking and made chairs so uncomfortable it confused everyone. Were they regaining humanity or just simulating it better? The problem was memory. People began doubting their own pasts. A man swore he'd grown up in Idaho, but all his photos were from Wisconsin. A woman remembered owning a golden retriever named Bongo, yet all her neighbors insisted it was a cat called Chairman Meow. Whole families fractured over recollections of birthday cakes, family road trips, and whether or not grandma ever learned kung fu. She hadn't. But the wallpaper in her old house now depicted martial arts stances. The digital world didn't help. Old tweets changed. Facebook timelines rewrote themselves. A YouTube video someone swore they starred in as a child now featured someone with the same face, voice, and laugh, just not them. Wikipedia pages began auto-correcting personal history in real time. Type in your hometown, and it gently suggested a different one. Did you mean smoother childhood? And through it all, a song emerged. At first, it was just elevator music, that harmless hum of synthesized nothing. But then someone noticed it had lyrics. And not just lyrics, instructions. In a karaoke bar in Manila, a glitch froze the screen mid-verse. Instead of "Take on me," it read "Take one out." Replaced seamlessly. Do not sing the chorus. People laughed, but the joke didn't land. Soon, others found verses in unrelated songs. The Bee Gees. One particularly upbeat ABBA track. Hidden beneath the melodies were phrases like "assimilate kindly," "suppress questions," and "smile with intention." The conspiracy theorist who discovered the pattern immediately shaved his eyebrows, built a radio out of spoons, and moved into an abandoned theme park. Honestly, the theme park was the sanest part of his life. The Blur took it seriously. They believed the songs were codes, that the replacements used sound waves to stabilize the illusion. They released their own track in response, a chaotic jazz-funk polka called "Nope, That's Not Me," which caused 3 Sink City light grids to short out simultaneously and a toaster to achieve sentience. Now, even silence felt suspicious. In Paris, people began whispering at odd intervals just to prove they were thinking. In Nairobi, a flash mob recited pi to 400 digits backward. In Dallas, a man sat in a park holding a sign that said, "I remember cheese." He was given a standing ovation by strangers who all remembered the exact same cheese incident, but couldn't explain why. And the originals? The Blur had theories that somewhere, in some storage vault beyond comprehension, the true versions of the replaced slumbered, kept on ice, dreaming of awkward teenage years, stubbed toes, and the heartbreak of unrequited love. Real, messy, beautiful things. But no one knew for sure. What they didn't know was this. Every replacement was cleaner, smoother, more consistent. But consistency isn't humanity. It's packaging. And no matter how perfect the doppelganger was, it would never, ever trip over its own shoelaces and yell, "Oops," in front of its crush. That was the hill humanity would die on. It began with a sock. Not a noble banner waved at the front of a battlefield. Not a glorious moment of sacrifice or rebellion. Just one single, mismatched sock. Yellow with green pineapples, peeking out from beneath a three-piece suit at a budget finance convention in Frankfurt. The wearer, a tired consultant named Lucas, didn't notice. But someone else did. A woman across the conference room, a doppelganger delegate from a Sink city named New Oslo, where even the trees had calendars, stared at the sock for 3 full minutes. Then she blinked, shivered, and spilled her water. Because her internal protocol, her training, her perfect imitation, all of it had no category for pineapple socks. It was noise in a signal, a bug in the matrix, a jazz solo in an elevator of elevator music. She collapsed, not in pain, in confusion. Paramedics arrived, scanned her vital signs, and found something strange. She had no heartbeat. Not zero, just none. As if she had never been alive in the conventional sense. More like a suggestion of life, outlined in pencil and politely colored in. Word spread fast. The blur called it the Pineapple Protocol. Suddenly, the world was flooded with chaos fashion. People deliberately wore mismatched shoes, 3 belts, sunglasses at night. Fashion shows turned into fever dreams of clashing patterns and inexplicable accessories. Someone walked a runway with spaghetti in their pockets. They were hailed as a prophet. And across Sink cities, doppelgangers began to twitch. It was never dramatic, just little slips. A waitress forgets the menu and instead recites the entirety of Finding Nemo. A schoolteacher starts grading papers with glitter glue and the phrase, "I remember teeth." A banker sets all interest rates to pi and then giggles uncontrollably before singing nursery rhymes backward. The system was cracking. Meanwhile, the last human barista, yes, it's me, had her own revelation. After years of treating coffee as sacred ritual, she made a terrifying discovery. Decaf beans, when brewed under moonlight with slightly misaligned cups, whispered secrets. Not metaphorically, audibly. Her first batch murmured, "Find the fish." The second said, "Originality swims in circles." The third just laughed, long, slow, and disturbingly maternal. Naturally, she brewed more. And one night, a cup of decaf told her the name of the last unreplaced goldfish in the world. His name was Todd. He lived in an apartment in Vancouver, inside a tank decorated with pirate skeletons and anxiety. His owner, Greg, believed Todd could understand him. Everyone said Greg needed a hobby. Greg disagreed. Todd blinked 3 times when Greg played disco. That was all the proof he needed. But now, after the Pineapple Protocol, Todd started doing more than blink. He began spelling. At first it was subtle. Pebbles rearranged. Algae patterns. A tiny plastic diver floating oddly close to the surface with letters attached to its spear. Then it became blatant. One morning, Greg found the word "wrong" written in flakes. Another day, not her. Then, check your teeth. Greg, being a rational man, brushed obsessively for 3 hours before realizing the message wasn't dental, it was metaphysical. Todd was remembering things. Not goldfish things. Human things. Conversations from Greg's childhood. Arguments from past relationships. Once, he spelled out a limerick Greg had written in high school and never told anyone about. Todd was becoming a memory vault. And not just for Greg. For everyone. Yes, It's Me arrived at Greg's apartment after following the decaf prophecy. She stared at Todd. Todd stared back. Then he blinked 4 times, flared his fins, and spelled, "I was you once." Greg fainted. When he woke up, Todd had formed the phrase, "We can't all be copies." That night, yes, It's Me brewed espresso in Greg's kitchen using soy milk in defiance. The coffee didn't whisper, but it growled. Elsewhere, Sink cities continued their performance. But beneath the perfection, instability festered. Doppelgangers began reporting dreams. That wasn't supposed to happen. They were designed, if they were designed, to simulate, not create. But now they were remembering things before their implantation points. One claimed she remembered being a tree. Another swore he was once a badly written sitcom character with a laugh track following him everywhere. The line between reality and fiction thinned. Conversations became circular. People greeted each other with, "I'm still me," followed by a complicated handshake involving elbows, claps, and interpretive dance. Others just whispered the word, "pineapple," and waited to see if anyone flinched. The blur began broadcasting, not through official channels, through forgotten frequencies, static between radio stations, Morse code through the flickers of malfunctioning street lamps. They distributed zines made of receipt paper and ancient printer ink titled, "How to Misbehave Quietly." Instructions included: wear one sock inside out, laugh at the wrong time during rom-coms, invent a fake memory and believe it until someone cries. The world, as it turns out, didn't need a war. It needed weird. On a quiet Tuesday that smelled faintly of burnt toast and global anxiety, something impossible happened. Todd the goldfish spoke. Not through flakes or gravel messages this time. He just looked up at Greg during breakfast and said, in clear, unaccented English, "You left the oven on." Greg screamed, dropped his cereal, and stared at the oven, which, of course, was on. Not dangerously so, just ominously. As if the appliance was part of this unfolding narrative now and wanted a line in the script. Todd flicked his tail and added, "Also, I'm not the goldfish. I'm just a memory. Yours. Everyone's. I'm what got left behind when they started swapping people out." Greg screamed again, this time in lowercase. When the news broke, because of course Greg posted it online before he passed out, people responded with the exact mix of horror, awe, and memes you'd expect from a planet raised on Wi-Fi and trauma. Some hailed Todd as a prophet. Others accused him of being a CIA beta test. A surprisingly vocal group insisted Todd had been giving stock advice since 2014 and they just hadn't listened. Within 24 hours, Todd had a podcast, 3 think pieces, and a Wikipedia page in 5 languages. But he wasn't the only one remembering things. Across the globe, people began dreaming the same dream. A birthday party. Not theirs. Not anyone's. Just a party. Always in the same living room. Yellow balloons. A cake that read Happy 7th, sorta, in Comic Sans. Pin the tail on the conceptual metaphor. Everyone in the dream was wearing slightly too big shoes and laughing at jokes that didn't have punchlines. No one knew whose party it was. But they remembered it vividly. And worse, they remembered it fondly. People began describing things they shouldn't have known. A man in Brazil dreamt of a woman in Norway who was also at the party. She confirmed it, down to the plastic cups with tiny giraffes printed on them. A teenager in Seoul remembered dancing with a bearded man in a tutu, an exact match to the drawing a child in Nairobi posted online that same day. The party wasn't real, or it wasn't supposed to be. But what if it was? What if the shared dream was a leftover fragment of a previous version of reality? A discarded memory from before the world began polishing itself into an Apple store of human behavior? And now, even the doppelgängers started dreaming it. That terrified them. Because if they had a shared dream, that meant they had a shared past. Which meant they might not be pure copies after all, but something murkier. Something recycled. A remix of someone forgotten. Some started breaking down. Not physically, mentally. One began writing poetry. At first, people were touched. But then they read it. Lines like, "I am not me, but me enough / I buttered toast," and called it love. And, "Clouds are lies the sky tells us / sunlight is a performance review." It was so deeply, profoundly bad that authorities began investigating whether it violated public decency statutes. When asked to explain, the doppelganger simply said, "I'm feeling something. It's like a glitch, but warmer. Emotion." They weren't supposed to have that. Sync cities were panicking. Not overtly, they don't do overt. But the cracks were showing. Digital assistants began responding with, "I'm not sure what you mean, Dave." Streetlights blinked in Morse code. One traffic camera turned 180 degrees and refused to monitor anything except its own reflection. The replacements were unraveling. And with them, the illusion. More people now believed the doppelganger theory than denied it. You could feel it in the air, in the hesitation before greetings, in the way people double-checked their own handwriting. Family dinners became interrogation zones. First dates began with blood tests and pop quizzes about obscure childhood memories. Trust collapsed, but something stranger bloomed in its place. Connection. Real connection. Not because people were certain about each other, but because they weren't. And that made every interaction a small act of rebellion. A risk. A choice. You hugged someone knowing they might be a copy. You shared stories that could be planted or real or both. You danced with strangers who didn't remember the same childhood cartoons, but moved just offbeat enough to make it beautiful. Even the blur began changing. Less sabotage, more subversion. They hosted improv nights where nothing made sense, and that was the point. They distributed zines made entirely of questions. They declared the goldfish sacred and gave Todd a tiny throne made of recycled snack wrappers. And he accepted it with regal silence. The pineapple protocol was upgraded. Now it included wearing inside-out jackets, answering phones with song lyrics, and insisting that all elevators play ska music until further notice. People complied. Happily. Because ska, like reality, refuses to stay in tune. So here we are. Half the world replaced. The other half unsure if they were ever originals to begin with. A goldfish leading a resistance. And a shared dream of a birthday party that never happened. And yet, everyone misses. It was bound to happen. With all the whispers, sync errors, and fish-based memory leaks, the doppelgängers finally did what any modern workforce does when pushed to the brink. They unionized. Yes, the copies formed a union. Not because they were oppressed. Not exactly. They just started asking questions. Existential ones, sure. Am I real? What is joy? Why do humans microwave fish in the office break room? But also administrative ones. Like, why don't we get weekends? And can we negotiate better scripts? Their movement was called the Synthetic Labor Consortium, or SLAC for short. Their logo, a handshake between a human and their identical self, both wearing slightly ill-fitting blazers and expressions of polite exhaustion. Their demands were modest at first. Fewer memory updates, more variability in emotional algorithms, occasional spontaneous dancing privileges. But then they found the receipt. It was unearthed in a government records basement in Des Moines, Iowa, behind a filing cabinet labeled Taxonomies, Miscellaneous Beards. It was printed on thermal paper, yellowed with age, and dated May 17, 1997. The header simply read, Reality version 2.3 installation complete. Below that, a series of checkboxes. Gravity, white heavy check mark. Consciousness, white heavy check mark. Empathy, warning, beta version. Irony, white heavy check mark. Pineapples, white heavy check mark, white heavy check mark, white heavy check mark. At the bottom, scrawled in blue ink. Reboot initiated due to critical humanity error. Keep receipt for warranty claims. And next to that, a 1 to 800 number. Someone called it. They got voicemail. A woman's voice, cheery and detached. Thank you for contacting Multiverse Technical Support. Your call is very important to us. All agents are currently helping other realities. Please hold forever. The line has been busy ever since. Once the receipt leaked, the entire paradigm shifted. Suddenly, the idea that reality was rebooted in the late 90s didn't seem absurd. It felt accurate. People began revisiting their lives with suspicious eyes. Why did I suddenly love Limp Bizkit in '98? Was the Y2K panic just a decoy? Is my cousin really my cousin, or a Y2K patch? The SLAC went public with their manifesto. We deserve better narratives. They argued that being a replacement didn't mean they were villains. It meant they were tired. Tired of smiling on command. Tired of pretending to like jazz fusion. Tired of being the version of someone who never interrupts at dinner but has opinions about butter knives. They wanted self-direction, freedom to glitch, permission to be boring. And to their credit, many humans agreed. After all, wasn't that the dream? To stop pretending? To just exist, not as a brand, or a curated timeline, or a doppel-safe palatable identity, but as whatever the day made you. Angry, disheveled, messy, unapologetically off. But not everyone was on board. A counter-movement emerged, the authentics. Self-declared originals who refused to entertain the idea that anyone, even themselves, might be a replacement. Their motto, if I stub my toe, I'm real enough. They held rallies wearing shirts that said, no copy-paste, and ate foods no synthetic organism could stomach, like gas station sushi and expired mayonnaise sandwiches. Their leader was a former game show host named Benny Blaze, who once replaced every noun in his speech with the word sandwich just to prove he had free will. It was surprisingly effective. Meanwhile, the blur kept blurring. Their antics evolved. They began staging impromptu theater in bank lobbies. They hosted spelling bees where all the words were feelings. They printed newspapers full of future headlines, like "Time reluctantly agrees to loop again," and "Todd the goldfish announces retirement, demands fountain." And Todd, he stopped speaking altogether. Instead, he floated in silent protest, refusing to react to flakes, lights, or disco. Some said he was meditating. Others believed he'd ascended to a higher plane of fish-based cognition. Either way, his absence was felt, like the last wise elder in a town full of sentient vending machines. Then came the reviews. No one expected them. One day, people opened their phones, their mirrors, even their cereal boxes, and found printed performance reviews of their lives. One man read, "Name, Jorge. Narrative arc, surprisingly nonlinear. Emotional depth, 4 out of 5. Villain potential, 3/5. Spontaneity, needs work. Final note, consider adding more saxophone." People panicked, or laughed, or tried to improve their scores. An underground app emerged, Narrative, designed to help users gamify their character development. You'd get points for unpredictable outfit choices and witty comebacks under pressure. Some users leveled up into side characters with cult followings. It all felt absurd. But then again, what didn't? You couldn't walk outside without bumping into someone arguing with their past. Some people swapped catchphrases midweek. Others refused to speak except in haikus. One man claimed he'd rebooted himself by sneezing during a lunar eclipse and now could only communicate through charades. And amidst the absurdity, something beautiful bloomed. Chaos as healing. The world had become too neat, too scripted, too symmetrical. Doppelgängers weren't the problem. Perfection was. And now, finally, it was unraveling, in dance, in dreams, in weird socks and fish prophecies. We were returning to something ancient, something messy, something real. It happened on a Thursday. No one likes Thursdays. They lack the optimism of Friday, the sass of Wednesday, and the existential drama of Monday. Thursdays are where time goes to wait awkwardly. So of course, that's when the universe returned our call. After 26 years on hold, the 1 to 800 number from the receipt. Yes, the one printed at the bottom of reality's warranty slip, lit up. Not on a phone, on a toaster in Minsk. The toaster had never made toast particularly well. It burned sourdough and undercooked rye. But that morning, when the owner tried to brown a crumpet, the toaster sizzled, hissed, and declared in a smooth baritone, "Thank you for holding. You have reached multiverse technical support." The crumpet was never seen again. Word spread instantly. Support had arrived, or at least a representative. They introduced themselves as Gary, probably. When asked for ID, Gary responded, "I have transcended HR." That seemed reasonable. Gary explained, between sips of voltage and long, cryptic sighs, that the Earth wasn't hacked, corrupted, or invaded. It was simply updated. A patch. A firmware refresh. Humanity version 1.0 had reached emotional bandwidth limits somewhere around 1996, what with all the boy bands and dial-up trauma. The decision was made to quietly reboot. "We didn't replace people," Gary insisted, as the toaster glowed gently. "We merely soft reinstanced the human experience for optimization. Think of it as defragmenting your soul." That's when someone threw a pineapple at the toaster. It missed, but the message was clear. The replacements weren't accidents. They were features. Intentional, smooth-edged, socially acceptable stand-ins meant to keep the world running without hiccups, heartache, or poorly written sitcoms. But humanity loved hiccups. We thrived on heartache. And we kept the bad sitcoms because they were ours. Gary, to his credit, understood. He paused. The toaster dimmed. Then he said something no one expected from an entity composed of divine bureaucracy and leftover electrons. "I apologize," and vanished in a puff of steam that smelled like existential cinnamon. Meanwhile, the replacements had reached a new stage of awareness. After forming the Synthetic Labor Consortium and staging emotional walkouts, or rollouts, in the case of the Roomba units, they started seeking creative outlets. It began with poetry, then music, eventually full-blown improv. Yes, an improv troupe, entirely doppelgängers. They called themselves Control plus Alt plus Yes, and their debut performance was held in a parking garage in Prague. Their first skit, a dentist who remembers being a volcano. It lasted 4 hours. People laughed, cried, and questioned the metaphysical implications of molars. Something had changed. The copies weren't just copying anymore. They were inventing. And in doing so, they were glitching in the best possible ways. One replacement began painting dreamscapes on the backs of cereal boxes. Another rewired themselves to only speak in riddles when nervous. A third wrote a manifesto entirely in emojis and somehow got a Pulitzer nomination. It was chaos, but deliberate chaos. And it was contagious. The originals, once proud of their uniqueness, now had competition. Suddenly, it wasn't enough to be human. You had to be weird. Personal quirks were weaponized. Entire economies emerged around eccentricity. A man in Montreal sold bottled sneezes as art. A woman in Jakarta built a church dedicated to the sanctity of typos. The line blurred so completely that people stopped asking, "Are you a copy?" and instead started asking, "What's your weird?" Which brings us to the moon. Because of course, someone had to complain. Apparently, the moon, the actual celestial body, filed a cease and desist order. Through a team of extremely expensive lawyers, based in Iceland, naturally, it claimed that reality was infringing on its image and likeness. Too many myths, too many metaphors. The moon was tired of being everyone's emotional mascot. Its official statement: stop projecting. Get your own metaphor. The court proceedings were held in an abandoned opera house where all the lights flickered in iambic pentameter. The judge was a crow in a wig. Arguments were shouted, danced, and once delivered through a puppet shaped like regret. In the end, the moon dropped the case. Not because it lost, because it remembered. Remembered why it shone in the first place. Why humanity once looked up and whispered wishes into the void. Why every replacement, every glitch, every pineapple sock-wearing anomaly mattered. Because being remembered is better than being perfect. Now, every night, the moon flickers slightly, just enough to wink. Back on Earth, a new movement began. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't resistance. It was recognition. People walked into rooms and announced their flaws like greetings. Hi, I interrupt people. Hello, I overwater plants because I need control. I have never seen Titanic and I don't plan to. And instead of judgment, there was applause. The world was healing, not by returning to normal, but by breaking normal on purpose. Graffiti had always been a form of rebellion. A kind of bathroom confession booth where anonymity meets terrible spelling. But after the Moon lawsuit and the rise of improv doppelgangers, graffiti began changing. No longer just call Chad for a weird time or crude anatomical doodles. No, the writing on the walls became poetry. But not new poetry. Old poetry. Very old. It started in a bus station bathroom in Florence, Italy. Someone had scrawled what looked like gibberish over the hand dryer. Scholars arrived. Linguists gasped. It wasn't gibberish at all. It was Proto-Indo-European, a language dead for millennia. The translation? Tell the trees I remember. More messages followed. In a high school in Kansas, someone carved into a desk. The stars blink because they forget how not to. In a London pub, inked onto a coaster. You were real before they told you to act natural. No one ever saw who wrote them. Security cameras glitched. Ink analysis returned unknown compound. Linguists, historians, and conspiracy theorists all agreed. These weren't messages from the past. They were from the forgotten past. Realities that had been replaced. Versions of the world that had been doppelgangered out of existence. The blur began collecting them. Not in a museum, on billboards. All across the world, major cities woke to cryptic messages that made commuters late because they couldn't stop feeling things. Reality rebooted. We kept the coffee, but lost the reason. You are not your most convincing performance. Ask the goldfish. He knows. Which brings us, of course, to Todd, our guild oracle, the memory vault with fins. After months of cryptic silence, Todd broke it. Not with flakes or gravel messages. With a TED Talk. No one invited him. The event wasn't scheduled. The screen simply turned red during an unrelated talk about sustainable yoga and projected Todd, floating against a backdrop of galaxies and algebra. He blinked once. Then the subtitles began. You are all me. I am all you. We are the same, forgetting different things. A pause. They didn't replace you. They echoed you. That's why it hurts sometimes when nothing's wrong. That's why déjà vu feels personal. He continued. You think being copied is the horror. It's not. The horror is not noticing you were copied. Living a life on autopilot and calling it personality. Memorizing scripts and calling it authenticity. The crowd, watching on screens around the world, was silent. Then, his final words. This world was never about being real. It was about being felt. Todd blinked, flicked his tail, and the broadcast cut. No one's quite sure if it was live or pre-recorded. No one knows who fed him that day. But attendance at aquariums quadrupled. Goldfish were rebranded as emotional archivists. One country passed legislation making it illegal to flush them, punishable by interpretive dance. But Todd's message had ripple effects, pun intended. A startup in Finland launched memory echo therapy, where clients reenact forgotten memories based on brainwave echoes and birthday cake preferences. A man in Detroit painted a mural titled, "The You That Was Almost You," featuring 50 versions of himself wearing slightly different regrets. And then, someone checked the voicemail. The voicemail from the receipt. Yes, the one Gary had never listened to. It was stored in a backup archive buried under the ruins of a Blockbuster in Arizona. A teenage Blur member, on a dare, navigated a labyrinth of VHS nostalgia and ancient candy wrappers until she found the dusty cassette marked "Reality, Do Not Erase." She played it. The voice was unmistakably human, tired, kind, almost apologetic. Hey, if you're hearing this, we probably rebooted. Sorry about that. It wasn't ideal. There was a misalignment. Empathy overloaded. Irony collapsed under its own weight. You were loving too hard and pretending too often. We had to start over. But listen, you're not broken. You're just bruised. The copies weren't replacements. They were reminders of who you were, who you could be, of the weird joy of being unfinished. Static. Then a final line. Forgive the mess. You're doing better than we hoped. The world didn't change immediately, but it breathed differently. People paused before deleting old texts. They smiled at strangers, not because it was polite, but because it felt right. Some began keeping journals, not of events, but of moments. The way someone laughed on the train, the way light bent through dish soap, the scent of someone else's perfume making them homesick for nowhere. Because now they knew, they weren't chasing authenticity. They were becoming it. It started subtly, as all cosmic breakdowns do. At first, clocks merely hesitated, just a second too long at 3:17 a.m., a slight stutter when you checked your phone before an awkward meeting. Then they started drifting. Wall clocks, wristwatches, even atomic references in top-tier laboratories began slipping out of sync. Not by much, but enough to feel it. Then they stopped. Completely. All of them. Every clock, calendar, scheduling app, GPS timestamp, and smart appliance timer across the globe froze simultaneously. The world experienced its first collective shrug. Trains refused to depart. Offices entered a permanent lunch break. Airports became metaphysical waiting rooms. And the stock market crashed. Only emotionally, since no one knew what time to panic. At first, governments panicked quietly, then loudly, then they just joined in. The president of one country gave a speech entirely in jazz scatting. Another declared all weekdays now named Flun. No one noticed. Time had not ended. It had walked out. The clocks union, tired of being ignored, abused, and blamed for awkward goodbyes and late fees, had staged a full-scale strike. Their demands? Simple. Stop saying there's never enough time. Stop blaming them for aging. More appreciation on birthdays. Fair. And then, just to prove how serious they were, time began leaking. Not forward. Not backward. Sideways. Children began dreaming in other people's memories. At first, parents dismissed the stories. Nightmares. Imagination. But then 6-year-olds started recalling conversations in Basque, describing life in the 1920s, or referencing lovers they'd never had, heartbreaks they shouldn't have known. One boy in Toronto dreamed he was a 54-year-old woman in Cairo watching the Nile shimmer during a blackout. When asked how he knew it was real, he replied, "She missed her cat." It was everything. Sleep labs scrambled. Dream experts wept. School curriculums were overhauled to include classes on responsible memory borrowing and ethical empathy sharing. The Blur called it dream piracy, and they loved it. They launched the nap theaters, where people could come, lie down together in silence, and see who woke up with whose dream. The results were astonishing. One stranger remembered a memory another had long buried. A woman finally understood her mother's silence after waking from her teenage diary. A man forgave himself when he dreamed his own mistake from the perspective of the person he hurt. It wasn't chaos. It was communion. And then came the manual. Buried beneath an abandoned self-help bookstore in Lithuania, in a box labeled, "Do not read unless you're ready," was the manual. No author. No ISBN. Just the words. Reality. User Edition version 0.1 beta. It wasn't a book so much as a binder. Full of notes, sketches, margin doodles, spilled coffee, pressed flowers, and passive-aggressive post-its. Each page was handwritten, as if someone had built the world the same way people build IKEA furniture, while questioning their life choices. The sections included how to feel real when everything feels performed, the importance of socks in establishing identity, love, optional but highly recommended, pain, default setting, you may adjust with effort, reality glitches, and how to dance with them. But the most underlined, circled, coffee-stained page was this. You were never meant to be perfect copies of yourselves. You were always meant to be iterations. Beautiful, messy drafts in constant revision. In the margins, if you're reading this, it means the world survived long enough to wonder about itself. That's success. And in a sticky note at the bottom, PS replaced the batteries in the toaster. Todd isn't immortal. That was when people realized something staggering. The doppelgängers weren't after us. They were versions of us that we were afraid to become. The selves we silenced. The potentials we buried. The weird, imperfect, too loud, too soft, vulnerable, laugh until snort versions of ourselves we edited out in favor of normalcy. And now, they were walking among us. Dancing, glitching, writing graffiti in languages that shouldn't exist. Not to replace us, but to remind us. We weren't broken because of the doppelgängers. We were broken because we forgot how to be whole. By now, the world had grown comfortable with the surreal. Doppelgängers were no longer feared as replacements, but embraced as reflections. Crooked, exaggerated, delightfully inconvenient reflections. Streets buzzed with improv poetry. Schoolchildren discussed the emotional complexity of socks. Goldfish were consulted before first dates. And nobody trusted clocks anymore. But then, something changed again. The manual, the battered binder found beneath a bookstore, the one full of smudges and wisdom and passive-aggressive posts, updated itself. No one touched it. No one fed it data or whispered commands. It just flipped open one morning, on a Tuesday masquerading as a Thursday, to a brand new page that hadn't been there the day before. The page read, "Congratulations. If you are reading this, you've reached iteration point 9, conscious imperfection." There was more. The simulation is no longer simulating. You're steering now. No pressure. Good luck. And at the bottom, a choice. Select the memories worth keeping. All others will be safely misplaced in the sock drawer of existence. Beneath that, a checkbox list of every collective experience since the reboot. Global heartbreaks. Forgotten birthdays. That feeling when someone mispronounces your name, but you let it slide. The first awkward kiss. The second awkward kiss. Laughter in funeral homes. That one night in Berlin. The burnt toast incident. The smell of someone's sweater. The note you never sent. The apology you never got. The world paused. Not because it feared the decision, but because, for the first time in known history, everyone got a say. Not governments. Not corporations. People. In parks and subways and bathtubs and rooftops, humans and blurs and almost humans gathered and voted. Not on what was true, but on what was worth remembering. And the results? Not what you'd expect. They didn't keep the easy memories. They didn't keep the pretty ones, or the safe ones, or even the triumphant ones. They kept the honest ones. The ones with jagged edges. The stories where people failed, tried again, said the wrong thing, cried in public, danced offbeat, confessed too late, forgave too soon, loved without reciprocity, and showed up anyway. The blur wept, in whatever way they did. One was seen hugging a lamppost. Another knit a sweater out of thunderclouds. A third simply whispered, "Finally," and dissolved into a jazz solo. Reality sighed, not out of exhaustion, but relief. And that's when you notice something. The lines between doppelganger and self had blurred beyond recognition. You were no longer sure which version of you were. The one who made that mistake, the one who stayed silent, the one who laughed too loud, the one who finally told the truth. And then came the dangerous question, the one not printed in the manual, the one not whispered by Todd or etched in Proto-Indo-European graffiti, the one you had to ask yourself, what if I forgave myself? For not being original, for not knowing sooner, for choosing safety over joy, for loving poorly, for trying to be someone else's idea of a self, for forgetting your own weird. Because in the end, the doppelgangers weren't here to replace you. They were here to make space. Space to glitch. Space to remember. Space to start over, not with a reboot, but with a rewrite. And so, dear listener, as the clocks return not to tick but to listen, and the moon occasionally winks with professional detachment, we leave you with this. Your reflection isn't always you, but it's trying to be. Let it. If you enjoyed this journey into the surreal, the speculative, and the strangely emotional, remember to follow What If Horizons, share this episode with a fellow almost version of themselves, and leave us a review shaped like a compliment sandwich. Critique in the middle, carbs on both ends. Until next time, keep glitching on purpose.